Well, those were three fascinating talks, and I have to say, Garnet, Del, you really hit some of the issues that I've been thinking about and that we've all been thinking about, and it's the idea of how we fetishize the process of making and these digital tools. What I think is quite fascinating from your discussion is the fact that you still need skill, even if you're handling these digital technologies. And of course, we know that skill is very much locked into the idea of craftsmanship, because we are here today to really talk about the sort of marriage between craft and technology and design, and that issue which Sandra raised, that Goethe had pointed out the problem, so many years ago, that if objects are mechanically produced or reproduced, do they lose their inspiration, their aura, their ability to transform us? And I think, we all know now, I could ask this question, but I think we all know the answer, that craft is no longer locked into the handmade. That's just a redundant question. We know that from students today, the fact that we all need our technologies. But so it is liberating to have these technologies. It is also a problem. So can we talk a little bit more in detail about some of the drawbacks of digital technology? Now I'll ask you first, Joey, because I thought it was quite interesting, unless I misunderstood you. Your pet peeve was that designers or craft makers were still thinking about functionality. And I thought, well, why is that so bad? Like, rather than just looking at it as pure sort of indulgence and experimenting with materials. Why is that a drawback?
They're thinking of functionality from the mindset of a venture capital kind of sales pitch, okay? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so like, how can I develop something that solves a problem that can get funded? Mm-hmm. So they're not necessarily thinking about funding, but that is the world that they've experienced. Mm-hmm. Digital, in my domain, right, which is wearables. That's how they've experienced wearables, and it's very difficult for them to then imagine a wearable that isn't a sales pitch, if I can put it in those terms. What's really interesting about electronic textiles is that they merge functionality. So you still have the textile functionality. It can keep you warm. It can change the way your body moves. It can drape on your body in a different way. With electronic interactive functionality, sensors or shape change or color change or lights, communication, all kinds of things. The biggest potential for the future of these materials is once you merge these two different functionalities, is that actually form becomes function. What I mean by that is if you have a textile that's woven with conductive threads, if you cut it here, the resistance will be different than if you cut it here. So you can actually, by changing the shape of the garment, of the textile, you're actually changing the resistance, which then changes the electronic circuit, which changes the interaction. And there's so much subtlety that can be achieved by actually designing with these materials, as opposed to what we're seeing coming out of research labs at Google, for instance, with their project Jacquard, where the collaboration with Levi's, they have pants, and they're just weaving a 3x3 matrix so you can control I think it's your speakers or something, right? You can actually change the sound level on your speakers, on your headphones or something like that. So imagine, having that same textile, but actually using it to perhaps, this is cheesy too, but perhaps, look at pictures of your baby. I have a newborn baby, so that's what I do all day long. But something that perhaps is more personal or less about this functionality that comes with consumer electronics.
Greg, do you want to speak a little bit about some of the drawbacks that you've encountered, either through teaching or curating or making?
Sure, I guess. To me, I guess, and this came up in some of the other talks too, is that seduction. That's one of the drawbacks, I think, is that the initial stage of this sleek new material or smart textile or technology, and that people only sort of don't work beyond that. That it's just this surface interaction, and the results that come out of that are very, just limited.
Well, they're lost in the process, right? And the difficulty of achieving what they want to make.
Yeah, and to me, it's more. It's the exciting stuff comes later on, once people have sort of gone through it, maybe later on in the relationship, as Garnet was saying, where they're understanding it, they're interacting with it, and then they start to notice the other possibilities that come out. To me, those are the really exciting things, that those potential things that can come up.
I think that, I'm assuming that you were going to ask me to speak next. It's interesting because I used to teach in a computer science department, and it's different now teaching in an art school, but teaching in a computer science department to what I consider to be average Californian kids, I would just give them a hunk of Play-Doh and give them a prompt to think through an idea and make something with their hands. And it was like, they're like, oh my God, there's this thing. I mean, they found it very engaging. Like, it's an interesting exercise. I don't know if I'm assuming there's some teachers here, but just giving people a hunk of Play-Doh sometimes was just like, people were very engaged with this stuff, and there's sort of return to this craft, partially because of such a saturation of sort of screen time, that just a hunk of Play-Doh is very kind of novel kind of interface for a lot of people. It's different teaching at an art school because people are kind of schooled in, polishing stuff and sculpting stuff. They have a different relationship, but limitations are, I think, just getting kind of, after you've made your little LED blink, after you've printed up your thing that you've downloaded on your 3D printer, it then poses a much harder question of why you're making it. And you can have the best technology in the world, fabrication technology, and you can still put through pretty bad ideas. The technology will give you a lot of opportunity to try out new stuff, but I've seen terrible, terrible things. At the facility, at the university that I was working at, they had this multi-million-dollar metal sintering machine, like insane machine, and they were like printing like rims for cars or just knickknacks of just junk, like are doing a 3D print of like somebody's modified like dash for their car. It was not really, I mean, it could be kind of interesting, but it really, really wasn't if you saw it. So having the new technology is only kind of part of the step and can open a lot of doors, but it's not, it doesn't solve the problem of what you're building and why you're doing it.
I'm going to open up to the audience, but I do have one more question, and it's really about access and technology, because all of you are affiliated with institutions. At the Gardner Museum, when we were working with Claire Toomey and we wanted to scan an object and then reproduce it digitally, we had to go out of house. And what I found, it was very interesting because we went to East Toronto, and where they had the big, huge stereolithography machine, but they didn't have the scanner to do the sort of reverse engineering, if you will. So they brought in a subcontractor who literally had his little scanning machine. It was like the size of a portable, old-fashioned, radio. Sorry, not a radio, but a stereo turntable. And he did it there. And so it still had, to me, a real sort of garage band, DIY kind of atmosphere to it. So I'm just wondering, where will we go? Where will the technologies go for the general public? Will we at one point be able to access these technologies really even more readily than we can now? Anyone feels free to jump in.
I can start off maybe. I teach at OCAD University, and that's always a question. It's OCAD sort of asserting itself as a university, and with that, I think they've sort of pushed away their tie to the traditional shops and sort of elevated design to this to this academic pursuit, and it gets lost a little bit because there's less time for people to interact directly with the technology to sort of get that hands-on, and to me that's where it happens. That's where the connections are made. Sort of removed from that, it's that's where you're sort of just working on the surface. At the same time, there's, I think it's easy, and this is what I'm trying to get my students to do, is not to worry about what's sort of right in front of them, what technology they can sit there and work with, but to realize that this technology is at their fingertips outside of the university, and all they have to do is sort of make those connections, speak to the people running them, and it's easy enough for them to kind of get in, see some results, and understand exactly what that material and that machine can do. So they don't have to own the machine. It doesn't have to be in their space necessarily. But as long as that approach of sort of learning it, understanding it, and then responding is taken up, then that's where I think they can go deeper with it.
What about in Vancouver, Del? What's that? Is it accessible outside of Emily Carr, or what's happening there in terms of these digital labs?
In terms of the accessibility, I mean, universities are, I mean, it's quite accessible inside of the university for students, but, and there definitely is a move to sort of hackerspace everything, which is interesting, and a lot of good has come out of it. But I mean, I see the most interesting stuff happening in libraries, in different museums, and different spaces that are kind of set up to service the public already. Within universities, you have all sorts of kind of bureaucratic hierarchies and minor turf wars and shop techs versus professors or whatever, you know. It's sometimes complicated, you know, and you end up having small little miniature ivory towers of labs, you know. But it really depends on the people who are working there. I mean, I found actually Emily Carr to be quite open, but I think the fascinating kind of area is, and there's an interesting example of Art Engine discussing with Art Engine about the hackerspace in Ottawa here, funded by the U.S. Embassy, which is a whole other can of worms. But libraries are really fascinating places. But yeah.
So if I can just answer or jump in for this as well, just for a second. You know, our students or our young people might have lost some of their skills in making things with their hands, but they've developed other skills with their hands for Googling things and surfing the web. And I even find that many of my students no longer come to my class, to learn some of the technical things because they've already learned it on their own by watching YouTube videos, whatever, working on their own. Some of them come to my classes to learn the technical things. Some of them already bring the knowledge with them. And once they do develop that knowledge, a lot of them choose not to use the facilities at the university for some of the reasons that you've mentioned, but also for cost reasons. There's actually, depending on the machine, depending on the access policy, et cetera, it actually might be easier for them to go outside to the maker spaces and or libraries, et cetera. So I think a question of access to that demographic, I would say, would perhaps no longer be an issue. I don't know if anybody disagrees with that. It's not my area of expertise.
Brian?
I just wanted to go back to the question of materiality and wondering, in listening to some of the presentations, what you learn about technique and being bound up in the material that you're using. Have you had experiences where then, say, using these new materials that you're talking about in these new ways, has that then transformed the experience of using what older materials or ideas of traditional materials? Not necessarily just because of the technology that you can sort of enact with it and ram it through a 3D printer if it's T, but that something about working with new materials in their new experiences, transforming something you're doing sort of backward.
I think just speaking more generally, the short answer is yes for my own work, but more generally, I think it's really, really interesting and often quite unnoticed how when new stuff comes out, the old sort of paradigms of stuff go through a radical kind of transformation trying to keep up and do a lot of evolution after their sort of obsolescence is announced. Whether it's the music industry, whether it's video games, when video games, digital video games came out, pinball machines went through this crazy transformation. Sort of the new, as soon as the death bell rings for something old, then the old thing wakes up and just panics and reshifts and reconfigures itself, and it's really kind of an interesting phenomenon in general. So I think that's definitely happening with in a lot of different areas in a lot of different industries with digital technologies, is that the old stuff is it's responding, in an interesting, and I think it's a productive way.
I would say, how is it responding? Because visually, as a curator, what I'm seeing is a facelift. I'm seeing the old being repackaged into the new, whether it's more complex a form, whether there's more voids in it. But can we talk about that a little bit deeper? Like, is it transforming old ways or practices? It's a profound question, and I don't know what is the answer to that, or can we?
I think part of it is that it goes completely in the other direction. As you get more refined, more machine-made. Let's say, like for example, the Walmart type of products, mass consumer products, I think, help launch DIY kind of movements, as a response, where you have definitely like a knee-jerk reaction against, you have such a massive trend that you have people going directly in the opposite direction, or with music, with digital downloads spurring on, cassette mixtapes, that you have this, the more refinement and more machine made, you have sort of this contrasting kind of flow that's always kind of pushing against stuff. So I really see the resurgence of craft being tied into the internet. Digitization, virtual reality, or whatever, information superhighway, people just sort of going like, well, yeah, I mean, I like knitting, and that's not going away, and rediscovering that,
Are there any questions from the audience? For Josie.
Thank you very much. It's very, very interesting. There's just one thing that I would like to maybe just direct my question at Garnet to start with. You've talked in a very concise and clear way about like a relationship, the evolution of a relationship between the maker and, let's say, the new technology. And where does the rapid pace of things insert itself here? Because you've all alluded to the fact that when somebody gets seduced initially by new technology, they try their hand at things that are fairly, that come easily to everybody. And then after that, there's a need for a period of pushing the boundaries and exploring further. I know many makers who are in that phase of honeymoon with new technology, but as soon as they experience this honeymoon phase, and they would be then moving on to the point of exploring and pushing boundaries, technology has changed already, and then they turn to be in a phase of honeymoon with the next technology. And so what do you see the impact of this being on the fact that do makers already will have the time to actually be afforded that period of thinking and pushing the boundaries before 2 or 3 iterations of the new technology is already there and make obsolete what they've, you know what I'm saying? It's moving so fast.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely sort of like a seduction, of new stuff, always churning, and it's, good for the economy, or bad for the world, depending on how you look at it. And yeah, some people just always are hopping on the new media kind of. It doesn't matter what the new thing is, it's just always sort of like this addiction to your next kind of thing on the cover of Wired or whatever. Some people, yeah, of course, some people never go beyond that. And some of the work that people do with 3D printers is just like very ordinary, just simple stuff, and I guess that's okay. I mean, maybe not. No, I don't think everybody needs to be making, groundbreaking kind of stuff. But I don't know. I mean, in terms of if we bring this back to like Maker Faire and like the maker kind of movement, I do kind of see some more reflection coming into that scene where, after criticism over something like military funding or criticism over the organizations having sort of questionable political kind of agendas, I see that community is responding and talking about issues of accessibility and gender politics. I mean, not really too much talking about it, but kind of acknowledging it and starting to ask stuff like that. So I think that scene is kind of starting to ask those questions, I think. But not everybody.
Next question.
Could we all agree on what Greg just said at the beginning, that whatever thing is the thing we are talking about, if it is a thing, it is not a tool, but more probably a desire or an obsession?
I mean, I threw that out because I think the idea of just a tool, it maybe sort of downplays the potential, because really, as you start to sort of immerse yourself in some of these technologies, you start to see things in a different way. I don't know. I don't know if I would. Sorry, I'm getting tripped up here. By saying that, the idea that it's more than just a tool, it's just the scale of it, or the potential that there's suddenly this. It's more than just a material relationship that we have with these objects now. There's this virtual way that we can interact with them, and to me, I think there's a lot of space in between the digital and the material that we're just beginning to explore, and those are the exciting and some of the ones that I was trying to show today, is where people are picking up sort of within that space between the digital and the material. So yeah, just a tool at times, yes, it's a tool, but it's a very powerful tool, and I think the implications are much bigger than maybe some other tools that have preceded it.
Sorry for the awkward time it's going to take me to run.
Wonderful panel. It just occurred to me as we're discussing that so far we're all professors, and so I don't know how it sort of fits into everyone's argument, but for a year I directed a lab at Cirque du Soleil because they wanted to bring in innovation and again new fabrication models, and they have things like a body scanner, and they use a scanner to scan all their performers across the world so that they can make customized, so they make customized suits for everyone. But it was a tremendous challenge because within the hierarchy of this creative industry, you have people who have ideas, and all of a sudden they have to talk to an engineer who's maybe like a lighting engineer, or or like a 3D engineer, and they have to be sort of humbled by their lack of knowledge in that field. And so it was a terrible misfit from, also like it's a difficult place to R&D right now, the profit margins. So I guess my question is there a way, and I think on our previous panel we talked a little bit about opening up these labs, but I think this transferring of knowledge to industries that really need to rethink their approach, because we have the high-tech industries like gaming and robotics, but most of the other industries actually don't know how to retool or to reintegrate these creative ways, including fashion.
Mm-hmm. Joey, do you want to add to that?
Yes, I mean, I can talk specifically about my experience developing the Ralph Lauren product, because we've all seen tons of prototypes for biometric shirts, and a lot of even big brands have had or have announced products that were maybe available online, but then not really. Most of the products that have been announced have not actually been manufactured at scale. It's an extremely difficult problem to make an electronic garment in a manufacturing context. There's a very good reason we don't have sensors in all of our garments yet. It's a very, very hard manufacturing problem. So in our case, the only reason it was possible is that we had 3 players involved: Signal, whose very survival hinged on the success of this product. Then Ralph Lauren, who their survival did not hinge on this product, but they were very much invested in developing this, and they had the capital, not just financially, but also in terms of their influence within the industry, to make sure that our third partner, the manufacturer, would not give up. All of us at different points wanted to give up. It took 3 years instead of 3 months. And it's extremely, extremely hard. So I had that slide where I talked about additive manufacturing and manufacturing plus, et cetera, and it sounds so seductive. But it's much more about just putting a new machine in a factory or putting a new machine in a maker space, right? There is, and that's why, it's not just a tool. So specifically for the Ralph Lauren biometric shirt, you didn't only have to kind of train the people on the floor on like, look, you can't stitch through this because there'll be a short circuit. It was actually a whole fundamental organizational shift within the whole factory, right? So they had to change the way they do costing. They had to change their management approach. We had to change the way that they do sourcing. And I'm happy to talk about I can talk about this for hours, so I'm happy to talk about this over lunch with anybody who's interested. But it was such a deep organizational shift within that factory, that c'est pas évident, as they say in French. It's not easy, it's not simple. And also, I think there's this perception with digital technologies that it's easy and you should be able to achieve mastery quickly, right? And ideas don't catch up to how easy it is to make the first kinds of things. And, I actually have a question that somehow relates to this I wanted to pose to the panel or even to the audience, because I'm not sure what the answer is. Is there a qualitative difference between somebody who, like, let's say, goes to their community arts center and takes a drawing class and makes a couple of crappy drawings, and then next session takes a painting class and makes a couple of crappy paintings, and they're like, okay, that's not for me, and then takes a glass blowing class, and then takes a ceramics class, right? And compare, is that a process that's qualitatively different from, using one 3D printer, then maybe using an Arduino, then being like, oh, okay, well, I made an LED blink, then using some other digital tool? Or is it just part of the same kind of exploration, and then some people really get passionate about, like, oh my God, ceramics is it for me, and I'm gonna make 100 crappy ceramics, and then I'll get good, right? And I'll make 100 crappy 3D prints, and then I'll finally be amazing, right? Is there a difference? I don't think so, but maybe there is.
If I could offer, just in relation to what you had just said, the idea of not just a tool and not just a material, that every tool and everything that you wield, and it's like if you could imagine it, there's an invisible web that is just spreading out from each of those objects that affects massive amounts of things. So there is a quantifiable difference between when you handle an Arduino, when you handle a 3D printer, and all of the materials that go into it, and all of the sort of social, economic, and cultural structures that those exist in. So while there might not be a radical difference for the person involved, how we make those things external and evident is definitely different and possible. Right now, I think, as you've been alluding to in some ways in the commercial aspects, we want to make those things invisible in the technological. We don't want to think about them. Sorry, I don't mean to monopolize, but they give me a mic and I get to interject.
So how much time do we have left?
We're getting close to lunch. People are probably getting hungry, so we could maybe start to wrap up.
Okay. I'd like to wrap up. So I have to say, I'm still not convinced that, I still think it's a tool, but what a tool. What an exciting tool, because I think we could talk about the impact of, the steam engine in the 19th century or so forth. It changes, of course it changes factory plants, of course it changes access to production. We are just living in this digital revolution. We're often caught up in the process of making and what it can give us. And that's what's so exciting about it. I think that, Greg, you really touched on something that I thought was interesting, and that is the in-between space. And that, I think, is a whole new world, particularly for craft makers, is to work in that virtual world, and what does that mean? And that, I hope we can maybe explore that a little bit more in the afternoon. Now, I did think it was very interesting, Joey, that you always said that whatever someone was doing, it was crappy. DIY, crappy. But that did make me think about anything, and even when Dale was talking about, the challenges of using these 3D printers is the 10,000 hours that we need, to quote Malcolm Gladwell. And that's what we do need to be a master at what we do. And we can't forget that, and we can't sort of only talk about it in this kind of vacuum, but in that larger context. But thank you for this wonderful discussion and great audience.